Not long ago, Lupe Fiasco tweeted that Mortal Kombat is for people who can't play Street Fighter. Unsurprisingly, a flame war ensued and ended with Fiasco deleting his tweets. But this was just Tuesday in the FGC, and people trash each other's games all the time. They just usually don't involve Grammy Award-winning hip-hop artists arguing with 18-year-old furries. All this makes you wonder, why can't we all just get along? I mean, we're talking about video games, not politics, and more games are better for everyone, right?
It's only a game. Why you have to be mad?
But it's not so simple because competitive games have to compete for spots in ways that non-competitive games do not. And nowhere is this more apparent than at the largest fighting game tournament in the world, the Evolution Championship Series, aka EVO. Each year, a handful of fighting games are selected for a tournament where anyone can compete to try and win a prestigious EVO trophy for the game they trained countless hours for. With millions of people watching, this is not only great for the players, but also for the games. But just like how not everyone can grow up to become an astronaut, not every fighting game is going to make the lineup. And as newer games come out, the competition is just going to get fiercer. So what does it take for a game to survive in a world where you can have 14 iterations of a single franchise? Of course, sales are important, but that's only half the picture. The biggest selling fighter by far is Super Smash Bros. Brawl at nearly 13 million copies, but it was the only console Smash game that was absent at Genesis 3, and it had less entrants than even Smash 64 at Apex 2015. While Brawl got great reviews, and even had a good run in the competitive scene for many years, it was ultimately outlasted by Melee. A lot of this is attributed to series creator Masahiro Sakurai's insistence that Smash should be more like a party game and less like a competitive tactical 2D fighter, which led to Melee fans making Project M. For those who aren't familiar, Project M is a fan-made mod of Smash Brawl to make it play more like Melee by reintroducing advanced mechanics like wave dashing. It actually got popular enough to be featured at major tournaments, until people started getting afraid of Nintendo's lawyers. And in December of 2015, Project M ceased development. As you might already know, Nintendo lawyers and the Melee community have clashed before. In 2013, fighting game communities were allowed to get their game, the EVO lineup, for donating money to breast cancer research. The Melee community donated the most at nearly $95,000 and got accepted only to be told by Nintendo's legal department that their game couldn't be streamed. After a short-lived shitstorm, they retracted their ban and poor Nintendo reluctantly had their game shown to a live audience of 134,000 people. This is all too reminiscent of the spiteful relationship George Lucas had with Star Wars fans.
If you could be any character in Star Wars, who would you be?
I don't know. I like all the characters. Jar Jar Binks.
All this might sound like I'm just harping on Nintendo right now, but I wanted to show the persistence of a community that's been lugging around CRT televisions for 15 years and having their game featured at EVO for the 5th time with little support from the game company that made it. For the better or worse, this persistence has created a divide between the Melee and Smash 4 communities, and was the argument for why 2 Smash games will be featured at a single EVO.
The two scenes have very different tournament entry peoples, right?
Yeah.
They have
very little crossover.
Yep.
On the other side of the spectrum, the genre-reviving hit Street Fighter 4 was axed from EVO this year because it was predicted to have the same user base as Street Fighter 5. As much as people love Street Fighter 4, there's been a prevailing attitude that we need to have a fresh new start.
You have a bright future in Street Fighter.
Exactly.
But
does. I'll tell you what does not have a bright future is Street Fighter 4 on this show.
And yes, like newer Smash games, Street Fighter 5 also removed advanced mechanics to appeal to a broader audience to the consternation of many top players. So why are there 2 Smash communities while all the Street Fighter players from all the previous games are moving on to Street Fighter 5? I think it simply boils down to how much the company supports their games and scenes. As much as Capcom gets dogged on by the FGC, they've actually been listening closely to the competitive scene, sometimes to their detriment. The launch of Street Fighter V clearly showed that they prioritized the competitive crowd over the casuals. The gameplay itself is balanced, the training mode is excellent, and local versus mode shows few signs of an unfinished game. But that's not what the casual players saw on release day. What they saw after paying $60 was a story mode that a baby can beat, and a survival mode which was designed for masochists. This didn't impress the general public, and certainly not Angry Joe. This response was reflected in Street Fighter V's low sales figures, which only reached half of Street Fighter 4's sales in the first week. And even if they sell their projected amount of 2 million copies by the end of the year, it'll still pale in comparison to Mortal Kombat 10's crushing sales of 5 million copies in 2015. If you look at it from this perspective, Street Fighter seems like a failure. But while the game's launch seemed lackluster, Capcom has been sponsoring tournaments in a big way. It's true Nintendo has also started to sponsor grassroots Smash events, and Mortal Kombat has been featured in the ESL with esports levels of prize money. But what makes Capcom different is that not only do they sponsor tournaments, they're running their own official tournament circuit called the Capcom Pro Tour with $500,000 in prize money. This really brings the players together, and unifying the competitive base has helped the game break the record for most entrants for a single game at EVO in just 4 days. And Street Fighter V now has over 3,000 players competing, and the number continues to rise with plenty more time to register. Even the game itself is integrated with the competitive scene, with data miners finding sound files in the game that spoke the names of the tournaments throughout the year.
Stunfest, France.
From this perspective, it's clear why Capcom's Street Fighter V launch was the way it was. They're in it for the long game, and prioritizing the versus gameplay was the best way to do it, even at the expense of day one casual consumers.
I don't know, it's as if they're in a bubble and like they don't care at all to expand their player base outside of the competitive scene and the tournament players.
But while no one can know what the future holds for fighting esports, it's clear that there's a new direction that fighting games are going. ESPN has already advertised Daigo, and they even released an article about Winter Brawl X that read like some sort of perverted fanfiction. If I were invited to a corporate boardroom as a consultant, I'd say the new paradigm of the social media era is engagement marketing, and games need to last years, not hours. There are actually quite a bit of fighters out there that could dominate on this model. Outside of Street Fighter, there's Rising Thunder, rest in peace, whose maker was bought out by Riot Games, the creators of League of Legends. This means the company responsible for the largest esport will potentially be backing a fighting game that was already perfectly tuned for esports. Will Seth Killian's vision of a simple execution fighting game come back reskinned as LoL champions invading every PC bang in esports Korea? I hope so, because I personally want to see Vlad again, even if he is reincarnated as a sexy demon. Victory! And of course there's Pokken Tournament, which surprised a lot of people when it made the EVO 2016 lineup. I don't think people expected a multi-billion-dollar franchise to suddenly want to slum it with the FGC, but if you look at Pokken's combination of franchise power, Nintendo's support, Namco's fighting game know-how, and $100,000 in prize money, you know they're serious about building a large community. As for Smash, it could completely dominate, especially if Nintendo was somehow able to unite the Smash 4 and Melee communities in their next game.
Unite us. Unite the clans.
It actually looks entirely possible if you look at what even a fan-made mod like Project M was able to do. And the gods of both Melee and Smash 4 remaining the same game would bring the competition to new levels.
It's over 9,000!
But I know, this sounds like a pipe dream, and sports like rugby have had two competing rule sets and a divided community for over 100 years. Their story sounds eerily familiar.
This is why some people say that rugby league is more exciting to watch. Union fans would argue that they dumbed down the rules because their tiny little northern monkey brains couldn't understand rugby union.
Nintendo should at least make Melee HD to prevent its players from getting back pain issues from having to carry around CRTs to every tournament. But in all seriousness, the future of a fighting game, as always, will rely on having a passionate community willing to break their backs for the game, regardless of who supports them or how big they are. There's almost always room for other games as long as people are coming out to play them. Let me know in the comments where you think fighting games will be in 5 years. This was Gerald from Core Gaming. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more.